The gruesome killings dubbed the Friday the 13th murders.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're looking at 10 of the worst babysitters in history.
The grieving mother also described in horrific detail what she discovered on that dark day, saying it was like a horror movie.
For this list, we're looking at people convicted of horrible things while entrusted with children. Which of these horrifies you the most? Tell us in the comments. Louise Woodward. This case ignited intense media coverage, especially in the US and UK.
More and more people got sucked into the story. The tabloids sent out from London in ways that they hadn't before. The press box filled up.
On February 9th, 1997, 18-year-old British au pair Louise Woodward was minding 8-month-old Matthew Eapen in Newton, Massachusetts.
She lived with the Eapens, Sunil and Deborah Eapen, both doctors, and she was to take care of their 2 young children, Brandon and Matthew.
After Matthew died from a fractured skull and internal bleeding, Woodward was tried and convicted of second-degree murder. Prosecutors argued that she must have shaken the baby and dropped him onto a hard surface. On appeal, a judge reduced the conviction to involuntary manslaughter, and Woodward was freed after 279 days. She swore in a polygraph test that she had not caused the child any injuries.
Did you ever shake Matthew Eapen violently?
No.
Did you ever hit Matthew?
No.
The case remains controversial, and some medical professionals have since questioned the evidence used to convict her. Betty Smithy. At the time of her release in 2012, this former babysitter was the longest-serving female inmate in American history.
She's free. Late this afternoon, Betty Smithy walked out of Arizona State Prison a free woman.
Smithy was 20 years old when she was found guilty of first-degree murder in 1963. She committed the crime while babysitting 4 children on New Year's Day in Phoenix, Arizona. Smithy admitted to using a stocking to perform the act.
That's something that you can't forget, and you should not forget. You know.
She was initially sentenced to life in prison. However, while in prison, she received a letter from the victim's mother offering forgiveness. After that, Smithy became a model prisoner and was eventually granted clemency.
If she could do that, then it was my responsibility to try and become a better person than the person that I was.
Guchera Bobokulova. In 2016, this nanny shocked passersby in Moscow when she brandished graphic evidence of a murder outside a metro station.
This is the 38-year-old Russian nanny waving to the cameras as she's led into court.
The Uzbek woman had been stopped by police for a document check when she pulled a head out of her bag. It belonged to a 4-year-old girl who she had been taking care of.
Moscow investigators say Babakulova is undergoing psychiatric tests. According to Russian media, she had been registered at a psychiatric clinic in her homeland.
After allegedly killing the girl, Bobokulova had set the house on fire. Reportedly, Bobokulova said she heard voices and that Allah had told her to commit the crime.
She went on to call herself, quote, Allah's messenger.
She had watched the child many times before this, which somehow makes the whole thing even sadder. Gabriela Gonzalez. In 2011, Gonzalez was left in charge of her roommate's 2-year-old daughter in Richmond, Virginia, when the child suffered fatal injuries. The young girl was taken to the hospital via ambulance, where she lived for 3 days on life support before passing away. The babysitter claimed that the toddler hurt herself by falling off a bed. However, based on the severity of her injuries, it was suspected that something more violent took place. Gonzalez was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Jocelyn Ortega. On October 25, 2012, Marina Krim and her daughter Nessie returned to their New York City apartment to discover a horrific and heartbreaking scene. 50-year-old caretaker Jocelyn Ortega had stabbed Krim's 2 other children to death and left them in the bathtub.
The Krims lived in Manhattan's affluent Upper West Side. Neighbors were left shaken.
It's a tragedy, and I feel so terrible for this family. Horrible, horrible.
Upon discovery, Ortega turned the knife on herself, but survived. She later said that she had been experiencing money troubles and was angry because the Krims had suggested she do housework.
Prosecutors say the nanny felt, quote, resentment and rage at the amount of work she was being asked to do and that her anger reached boiling point.
In 2018, Ortega was found guilty of first- and second-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
The grieving mother also described in horrific detail what she discovered on that dark day, saying it was like a horror movie.
Elżbieta Plakowska. This woman from Naperville, Illinois, was responsible for the deaths of her own 7-year-old son and the 5-year-old girl she was babysitting in 2012. Police were horrified by what they found in the second victim's house, where the incident took place.
She committed the crime at the home of this girl she babysat because, quote, I didn't want to make a mess in my own house.
In addition to discovering the bodies of the 2 children who had been stabbed, they also found the bodies of 2 family dogs. Plakowska tried to blame the incident on robbers at first, then on the devil, but she was ultimately found guilty of the murders in 2017.
The judge made it clear he felt Plakowska knew what she was doing, asking the children to pray before she committed the murders, afterwards telling police, quote, 5 minutes ruined my life.
Michael Plumadore. On December 22, 2011, Michael Plumadore was left in charge of a 9-year-old girl and her 6-year-old sisters who lived in the same Indiana trailer park as he did. Tragically, the oldest child lost her life at the hands of her babysitter, who struck her with a brick.
This is one of those cases that people in this community will remember for a long, long time to come.
Plumadore avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty and accepting life in prison without the possibility of parole.
That's the first time anybody had heard him. It actually come out of his mouth what he did, with no expression, no emotion, no nothing. Just like it was an everyday occurrence.
Before the incident, members of the victim's family considered Plumadore, quote, a trusted family friend.
I have no idea why he did this. I know what he said at his guilty plea, and that's all we'll ever know.
Agnes Wong. This child carer in Salford, England, was responsible for the death of a 16-month-old boy, Hugo Wong, in 2007. In response to the child crying, Wong allegedly swung the boy into a bed or settee. He died from internal bleeding in his brain. By this time, Wong had served as the child's nanny for months. Based on the state of his injuries, the authorities believe that the child was regularly subjected to harm while under her care. In 2008, Wong was sentenced to prison for 5 years. Brenda Gale Kutro. A deadly babysitter is one thing, but a deadly daycare operator is something else. Brenda Gale Kutro was charged with double homicide following the deaths of 2 infants in her care. They appeared to be victims of trauma and asphyxia. Another infant reportedly suffered injuries as well. The incident occurred in Kutro's suburban home in Irmo, South Carolina, out of which she ran her daycare business. After her first trial's conviction was overturned and her second ended in mistrial, Kutro was eventually found guilty. She was sentenced to serve life in prison for her crimes. Prosecutors argued that her actions were the result of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. David McGreavy. One of history's most notorious babysitters, Englishman David McGreavy is sometimes referred to as the Monster of Worcester. After being kicked out of his parents' home, he had moved in with his friends, whose 3 children he babysat. In a drunken rage on April 13, 1973, however, he killed them all in different ways.
The gruesome killings dubbed the Friday the 13th murders.
He later said he had been fed up with the youngest one crying. He left their bodies on a neighbor's wrought iron fence and fled, but was soon arrested and sentenced to multiple life terms.
This is not somebody clearly who's ashamed of what he's done. He's showing everybody what he's done.
However, in 2018, a parole board found that he had, quote, changed considerably and cleared him for release.
He was refused parole on 9 occasions, and the parole board this time have decided that his risk is low enough that he could be trusted to serve the rest of his life sentence outside of prison.